Hi everyone, my name is Rhiannon Simpson. I'm a music education PhD student here at the University of Western Ontario. My research focuses on popular music education, informal learning, and the ways that teacher habitus influences pedagogical decisions made in secondary music classrooms. This presentation asks how music educators can develop the civic literacy of their students and curate non-music specific skills that forge a social justice orientation in music classes. I argue that the use of popular music, which is geographically relevant, allows students to engage with socio-political issues of importance to them and perceive themselves as members of both a musical and democratic community that can incite change. Morgan defines civic literacy as the knowledge and skills to participate effectively in civic life through knowing how to stay informed, understanding governmental processes, and knowing how to exercise the rights and obligations of citizenship at local, state, national, and global levels. Though the term civic literacy isn't often utilized in music education spheres, the idea that music classes can and should develop skills which promote democratic engagement is not a new one. In fact, Western's own Dr. Paul Woodford's book, Democracy and Music Education, is considered a seminal text when discussing the role music education can play in developing civically literate, democratically aware citizens. In his latest publication, Woodford argues that music is strongly implicated in the shaping of culture and thereby also of consciousness and society. He further states that the educational purpose of music class is as much, or should be, to socialize children into their humanity as it is to teach music. The suggestion that music educators have the responsibility to develop the civic literacy of students is at times a contentious one. In the end, we are music teachers, trained to teach musical skills, performance, composition, analysis. However, I, along with Woodford, Green, Small, and numerous others, argue that the separation of music from the culture and socio-political context in which it was created underrepresents the impact musical engagement has had and continues to have on the society that we live in. This is particularly the case for popular music, which both mirrors and shapes the values, ideals, and trends of contemporary society, for better or worse. To utilize popular music in the classroom without addressing the socio-political context it was created within only gives students one part of the musical picture and highlights music education's obsession with developing theoretically informed performance-related skills. This tendency has been extensively problematized by numerous scholars as it tends to alienate the majority of students who do not seek to become professional musicians in the future. In music education, students who do not find value in the theory-heavy, art-music-focused paradigm are often referred to as the other 80%. These are the students who do not continue to take music study after it is no longer a compulsory subject. In Australia, the choice to take music as an elective rather than a mandated subject of study comes at the Year 9 level. Despite the majority of students dropping music classes after grade 8, the focus of junior music education tends to be on notation reading skills, basic Western theory, and performance-based rehearsals. These are often referred to as art music discourses, skills and knowledges that are considered vital in art music fields. It's important to note that teachers can employ art music discourses when utilizing popular music as content. If teachers use Katy Perry to teach Italian tempo terms or Taylor Swift to teach notation reading, they are still teaching the skills which are more heavily valued by art musicians in comparison to popular musicians. As a professional popular musician, I've never asked my drummer to play Allegro. I've never read a country chord progression on 5-line staff notation. Though popular music is used in the context of these examples, the skills we associate with art musicianship are positioned as more worthy of a place in an academic music class. Though research suggests that up to 80% of these students will never put knowledge of art music discourses into practice past the age of 16, a focus on preparing the few who do is currently the dominant paradigm. Research shows that these few are almost always white, middle to upper class students. People of colour and low socioeconomic status are disproportionately absent from the 20% who continue to take music education, because for these students, both art music as content and as discourse is culturally irrelevant. When teachers justify teaching to the 20%, they tend to argue that these are the students with the drive, motivation, or talent to take music class seriously. However, implicitly, they are arguing that only those people who value art music discourses are worthy of a culturally relevant music education. And by extension, though neither conscious or malicious, they imply that students of colour and low socioeconomic status are less talented or musically motivated than that of their rich white peers. I'm not arguing that music educators are consciously racist or classist. Argues that the art music focused paradigm of music education places people of colour and low socioeconomic status at a disadvantage. My problem with the phase, the 20% or the other 80%, is that it vastly overstates the number of students who actually benefit from a knowledge of art music discourses. Of this 20% who continue to take non-compulsory music classes, the vast majority will finish school, pack up their instrument, and never utilise those skills again. I did some digging and found that in my home state of Victoria, Australia, there were 65,531 students starting secondary school in 2014. Of those, 1,381 or 2.107% took senior level music study in their graduating year of 2019. This 2% of students are the only ones for whom knowledge of art music discourses like theory or notation is mandated within the curriculum. This dominant argument to justify teaching a junior music education which only benefits 2% of the students is that exposure to art music discourses early is required for those who do study senior music to be successful. But this argument is fundamentally false. The high schools that I both attended and taught at introduced these art music discourses at a grade 10 and often grade 11 level, just 1 year before taking senior theoretically informed exams. That school is recognised by the national government as one of the most successful music programs in the country. Numerous other schools in the area take a similar approach and achieve higher senior music exam results than similar schools who introduce these art music discourses at junior and middle levels. So even the 2% of students who do require an in-depth knowledge of art music discourses are not disadvantaged when these skills are introduced later, not in junior music. I honestly can't see a good reason why the development of Western theory and notation skills takes up the majority of time in junior music education curriculums. This all being said, the percentage of students who will engage with democratic processes, utilize critical thinking, and have music as a part of their lives once high school is complete is 100%. The idea that we spend the majority of our time in compulsory music education preparing this number of students for a life outside of school, when we could be preparing this number, doesn't make sense. We are seeing a rise in anti-scientific, media illiterate tendencies in society at the moment. However, Generation Z students have demonstrated a willingness and motivation to engage with democratic processes and develop their civic literacy outside of the school grounds. From massive school walkouts to protest climate inaction, to using TikTok to buy seats that will never be filled at Trump's Tulsa rally. This generation are beginning to understand that democratic engagement moves beyond just voting, a right they are often too young to be afforded. Yet the majority of these students are unaware of the role music has played and continues to play in inspiring civil disobedience, protesting unjust policies, and raising awareness for socio-political issues. The Australian curriculum has acknowledged that skills associated with civic literacy can and should be developed across all learning areas. The nationwide curriculum mandates that the general capabilities of students be curated in every classroom, including music class. These include critical and creative thinking, intercultural understanding, personal and social capability, and ethical knowledge. These skills are fundamentally linked to the development of civic literacy. I argue that instead of music teachers seeing these curriculum capabilities as something to tick off peripherally, a unit plan or curriculum which dominantly aims to curate these skills could be a focus. So how do we do this? Like any pedagogical choice, the musical taste and values of the context you are teaching in need to inform this decision. What issues are of importance to your students? Which music do they listen to? And what is of value in their community? When teaching the concept of protest music, the minds of many educators move towards the role musicians like Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, or Bob Dylan played in the civil rights movement. But these songs were written over 55 years ago, and though it's awful that issues of equality and civil rights are still relevant today, Green argues that the music associated with these eras is not culturally relevant to contemporary pupils. My go-to thought was hip-hop, a genre that was born as a protest tool and engages with contemporary issues through music which dominates youth listening. But rap's association with consumerism, violence, misogyny, and homophobia makes teachers wary of using such music. Though the concept of realness in hip-hop mandates engagement with political issues, finding appropriate music can be difficult. Though I argue that the benefits of engaging with hip-hop in a thoughtful and analytical manner are worth the difficulties, I understand that not all teachers, principals, parents, and even students would agree. Further, in the Australian context, these often American artists are protesting a political system very different from our own. Though discussions of violence, racism, and oppression are relevant in Australian contexts, addressing these issues through the lens of gun violence or urbanity is less so. In a paper that I will hopefully be publishing later this year, I just submitted it last week, I argue that employing geographic consciousness is vital when choosing music that connects to the lived experiences of your students. This is what led me to Aussie rock. The genre of Aussie rock is ideal for developing civic literacy because, by definition, for a song to be a part of this genre, it needs to engage with socio-political issues, incite civil disobedience, or reference markers of national identity. Jenner and Forrest and Godinsky question whether there is a distinctly Australian sound, arguing that the sonic properties of Australian music are so influenced by British and American popular genres that no distinctly Australian sonic properties have been developed. Though I agree with this statement, I argue that the lyrical content of distinctly Australian music is what separates it from genres with similar sonic properties internationally. To understand this, a brief musical history of Australia is necessary. Australia has a history of rejecting markers of elite authority and creating music which encourages citizens to rise against oppressive rule. Tranter and Donoghue argue that the anti-authoritarian sentiments which inform a sense of national identity in Australia can be traced back to its invasion when freed white convicts began to rebel against British rule. Since then, Australia has reified figures of the working class who use civil disobedience to protest oppression, from outlaw bushrangers like Ned Kelly to the free-spirited swagmen who refuse to pay rent to wealthy landowners. Smith argues that some of the first distinctly Australian songs were created to spread news of the Eureka Stockade, a rebellion which saw working-class miners protest a taxation without representation governmental system. The lyrical content of Australian folk music of this time encouraged the oral transmission of songs whose lyrical content undermined the authority of elite British figures in the country and incited protest against oppressive colonial rule. When people think of music which reflects nationalism, minds are immediately cast to art music traditions, American wind bands, British concert bands, or Germanic orchestral traditions. But in Australia, the first distinctly Australian music did not come from Percy Grainger or Dame Nellie Melba. It was born from working class popular musicians who utilised this music as a tool for protest. Research from Turner and Edmonds demonstrates that the rejection of elite taste associated with British oppression, along with the reification of working class values, still inform a sense of national identity in contemporary Australia. The popular music tradition born from these values continued to grow since the Eureka Stockade in 1854. However, in the late 1970s and 1980s, the genre of Aussie rock reached its peak. A response to the socio-political context it was created in, Aussie rock explored what makes Australian identity distinct in a time where the national government officially removed itself from British rule and began questioning what a distinctly Australian cultural identity would look like. As it was concluded that the values of egalitarianism, civil disobedience, and national pride and geographic markers were Australianisms, Aussie rock musicians highlighted these values in songs in the same way that Australian folk musicians reified these values after the Eureka Stockade. Many Australians may assume that the term Aussie rock merely describes rock music that was written by an Australian musician, and often those from New Zealand, the best of which we tend to claim as our own. But an analysis of the top 15 Aussie rock songs of all time, as voted by the Australian public, shows that 11 out of the 15 directly address issues of class oppression, protests specific government policies, or encourages the development of civic literacy. The remaining 4 directly reference Australian geographic markers which inform a sense of national selfhood. Though sonically this music may sound very similar to the rock music created in America or Britain in the 1970s and 80s, it is the lyrical content which distinguishes Aussie rock from international comparisons. For example, the song voted #1 in the most iconic Aussie rock songs of all time was K-San, a song addressing the poor treatment of returned Australian soldiers after the Vietnam War.
And it's only other vets could understand about the long forgotten dark side guarantees, how there were no V-Day heroes in 1973.
Number 14, Solid Rock, asks the listener to reassess the ways in which the invasion of Australia is taught in classrooms and portrayed in the media when exclaiming, "Someone lied."
Well, they were standing on the shore one day, saw the white sails in the sun. It wasn't long before they felt the sting. White man, white law, white gun. Don't tell me that it's justified. Somewhere, someone lied.
And You're the Voice, voted 6th most iconic Australian rock song of all time, implored its citizens to use their voices to protest unjust governmental policies through demonstrated by this classroom poster that I designed. Aussie rock is not defined only by sonic properties, but by lyrical and ideological tropes. Thus, it can be argued that contemporary music, which may not sound like classic rock from the 70s or 80s, can embody the democratic values of Aussie rock within more contemporary musical genres, like Courtney Barnett addressing housing pricing and inequality in Melbourne.
If you've got a spare $500,000, you could knock it down and start rebuilding.
Some advocate for specific policy changes and directly address the Australian government, like AB Original's January 26, which asks that the national celebration of Australia Day be moved from a date which began the genocide of the Indigenous population.
Nah, you watching telly for The Bachelor, but wouldn't read a book about a fuckload of massacres. I remember all the blood of my characters. They remember 20 recipes for Lamingtons. Yeah, their ancestors got a boat ride. Both mine saw them coming until they both died. Fuck celebrating days made of misery. Why Oz still got the black history? And that shirt'll get you banned from the parliament. If you ain't having the conversation, well then we starting it.
Or Missy Higgins imploring the government to end its inhumane treatment of refugees.
He was carried from the water by a soldier, and the picture screams 1,000 different words. He was running from the terror with his father, who once believed that nothing could be worse.
It is not the sonic properties of this music that make it iconically Australian. It's the lyrical willingness to address socio-political issues, develop the civic literacy of listeners, and incite change. This allows musicians of any age and experience level to perceive themselves as potential change makers in their community. Our students may not be old enough to vote or run for council, but they are able to compose, record, and distribute music which advocates for democratic engagement. To do so, they may need to develop instrumental technique, performance skills, and in some cases pursue formal music training. But when the goal of compulsory high school music education is to develop civic literacy, these skills are means to a democratic ends, not the be-all and end-all of music education. Students who understand the role music can play in changing the hearts and minds of listeners will engage with sound in a complex, critical, and meaningful manner, whether they end up pursuing further music study or not. If we see the development of musical skills as a tool which can encourage democratic engagement, music education benefits everyone in our class. As movements like Black Lives Matter increase in relevance and power, allowing our students to perceive themselves as active members of their communities who can inspire and incite democratic change through their music is vital. Considering music as a language of possibility gives this voice to our students. Though they may perceive that their opinions as young people are unsolicited in the democratic process, their position as musicians, regardless of age, can lend them a voice which incites actionable change. A policy brief that I have developed may lend some additional insight into exactly how such a program could be implemented in your school, including ideas for lesson plans and assessment strategies. You can find it at the link in the chat or by scanning this QR code. I'm very happy to field any questions. Feel free to use the raise hand feature of Zoom to ask your question, or if you'd prefer, type it into the chat. Thank you so much for listening.